Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. In our fourth and final installment of navigating employer benefits and pension options, let's talk about maximizing those final years of your working career. When it comes to those last 5 years of working, they are very important. There are so many things that we can do to set ourselves up for success. Think of it like if you were taking a test and you had the ability to study for the test. If you have the ability to study 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 3 months, depending on how much time you can allocate towards something, it's going to increase the grade that you get and how successful you are. Based on the amount of time that you give yourself, it significantly impacts the overall result of the product that you have. In fact, we often judge things based on how much time we have. If someone tells us that we have a year to do something, as in planning a wedding, we feel pretty good about that. We're saying, okay, I could plan a wedding in a year. That will work very well. If you had to plan a wedding in 3 months, you might say that's really hard. It's doable, but it's hard. If you had to plan it in 3 weeks, well, now we're saying that's really pushing it. I don't even know if there's going to be venues that are available for me. Your retirement, if you think about that, that's not a 1 day event like a wedding. That's not a one time event like a test. Your retirement is something that you're planning for the next 10 to 40 years. And when you look at how much time we allocate towards understanding different things, I've seen people spend a good amount of time reading reviews and understanding which TV to buy. I've seen people put enough time into planning for events, buying a vehicle. All of these things are not as long as your retirement. When we talk about something as complex as our retirement, when we talk about a strategy that we need that works for multiple decades, many times I find we're not spending nearly as much time on our retirement. So, when it comes to you making the most out of your final working years, the number one benefit that you'll receive is a much smoother transition into retirement. If you're someone who's a little unsure or worried about their retirement, if you have 5 years to put a plan in place, would it be fair to say that you would feel better about your retirement? And we're not simply talking about sitting down for 5 years and writing out a strategy and then looking at your plan and then rewriting your strategy. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about putting the pieces in place that gets rid of all your concern and anxiety so that you feel very confident and comfortable about your retirement. You often hear me say wealth is more than riches. And the other thing you'll hear me say is that we want to enrich your peace of mind. And I often give the same example. If we were to walk across a tightrope, you and I would feel very uncomfortable about doing that because we haven't walked across a tightrope. Even if there's a net underneath, because we deep down know our opportunity of success, the likelihood of success is very low. We have not put any time or effort into this. It's fair to say that someone who walks across a tightrope for a living, where they perform in a circus, that person would feel really good about a tightrope walking challenge. They walk across a tightrope every single day and have been doing so for multiple years. So they feel really good about it. If you want to feel good about your retirement, the number one thing you have to do is have a plan in place of what we're going to do. And it can't just be a wishful plan because I do hear people that will say, well, I don't think we'll ever raise taxes. Okay, well, you could do that, but as a fiduciary who's registered in the state of Florida, I will be liable for such a statement because it's very likely that something can happen that will increase your taxes. Whether they go out on the news and say, I'm increasing your taxes today, or whether they allow a previous tax break to expire, as they did in the Obama administration, they allowed the Bush tax cuts to expire, or the Trump administration, he allowed different tax cuts to expire so that he can put his own in place. Or you'll find that they close a loophole or raise the limit or a cap on something. So for me, I know that I can, in good faith, make such a statement. I believe that we have to be prepared for all aspects of retirement because this strategy has to be in place to help us feel very comfortable and confident that when something happens, I almost just turn to that page in my strategy. Yep, I knew that this day would happen. What does it say on page 3 to do? Or, oh, I knew that would happen. What does it say on page 5 to do? And you just feel really good about your retirement. So the first thing that many of us need to do is take advantage of this thing that we call compounding interest, which is a very fancy way of saying that my money is working and it's multiplying. And if my money is multiplying, then my multiplied money is working and it becomes a snowball effect. And you find that with different companies that have been around where it's like the money is kind of growing, and then exponentially. That happened with Warren Buffett, happened with Amazon, it happened with a bunch of companies. Your money will exponentially grow if you allow it the ability and time to grow. In fact, there's this one chart, and if I find it, I'll put it up. And it basically said if you started at 25 and invested a certain amount of money every single year for 10 years, so 25 to 35, you invested that money and never invested another dollar again, but you grew at about 8% every single year, you would have more than the person who started at 35, invested that same amount that was agreed upon per year, but they invested it every year from 35 to 65. You would have more than that person. That is the power of compounding interest. Now, while the last 5 years before retirement doesn't give us as much time to compound and grow, we do want to take advantage of that. So, a great place to start, and depending on your overall retirement strategy, is taking advantage of these catch up provisions. If life and circumstances have kept you from being able to contribute that additional oomph of money, well, this is your chance to catch up. Hopefully, your kids are gone, you've been paying off your bills, and if not, we'll put that in the plan as well. But now we're able to invest more of our money towards our retirement. That becomes our central focus. I am going to purchase my freedom over these next 5 years. I'm going to put the amount of money that I need in. Now, that might mean that you need to actually take a look at your expenses. You need to take a look at your income, and you need to take a look at where your money is going, whether you have any extra money that's just kind of not being allocated towards anything. And then there's very simple calculations that we can use to see if there's a gap, whether there's more money than I need. The reason we start with the money is because when you're 5 years out, you now know what the amount is. If I told you you needed to invest an extra $500 a month as you get ready for retirement in these next 5 years, well, that number, if you waited 4 years or 3 years or 2 years, that number goes up astronomically, where it becomes almost impossible for us to allocate that high of a percentage of our money towards our retirement. And so that's why when we're 5 years out, it makes that number a little bit more manageable, a little bit more reasonable. Now, if the number is still astronomical, where it's just not possible, then we really need to take a step back and take an honest look at whether we can retire in the next 5 years. Now, before we make that decision, let's move on to number two, which is paying off your debt. If maximizing your retirement contributions is not the most efficient way for you to maximize your retirement lifestyle, the next thing that we normally can look at is paying off our debt. Whether you want to talk about paying off your credit cards, paying off your mortgage, paying off your car note, there is a variety of debt that we can get rid of. And if we're able to get rid of it, it then decreases the amount of money that we need. Sometimes we can actually lower our debt so much that we actually don't need to generate any more revenue. Now, if you're someone who's saying, well, Dre, I've actually already got rid of a lot of my debt, or you don't have a lot of debt in general, then it may make sense for us to explore other options to lower your overall expenses. That could be moving to a different state. That could be moving to a different country. A portion of your overall retirement expenses is based on where you're living at. If we were to consider staying in the same place that we're located, well, we know that that means that things like our food and transportation, that's going to be roughly about the same. We know that our electricity and our water bill, that that'll be about the same. If we're able to start exploring whether we can get a smaller place, and if we downsize, well, that may decrease some of these expenses. Maybe we don't need as much water. Maybe we don't need as much electricity. If you're willing to move to a different state, then you know that that's one of the reasons that people from New York move to Florida. Sure, our weather is great. Sure, it's warmer and it's fun. And you have lower taxes, but we also have a significantly lower cost of living in Florida than in New York, where there are companies that do this thing called nearshoring. And it's a very fancy way of saying that I'm going to stay in the same country, I'm going to stay in the same time zone, but I'm going to move to a lower cost of living location so that I can save a significant amount of money. We normally talk about offshoring where we send it completely overseas, but that sometimes has other unintended consequences with language barriers, quality of products, and different things like that. For example, one of the investment banks I worked at, they were closing their New Jersey office. Well, the cost of living in New Jersey is much higher than the cost of living in Jacksonville. So they were moving the exact same positions, the exact same language, the exact same culture and country, but it was going to be significantly lower, where the average person in the New Jersey office was getting paid maybe like $70,000, $100,000, $150,000. And then when they moved it to Jacksonville, the average person was getting paid $30,000, $50,000, and $70,000. So they were able to make a significant savings on their overall expenses without it really impacting the quality of the product. You don't have to necessarily leave the country to get these cost savings. You can move from somewhere like New York to somewhere like Florida, and you can take advantage of the different tax structure and the different cost of living adjustments to where your money goes a lot further in some of these places. Now, if you're someone like me who lives in Florida, you may want to explore options of living in Louisiana and other states that have a lower cost of living than Florida. Generally speaking, there's going to be at least one state that has a lower cost of living than the state you're in. Now, obviously, if you're in the 50th state, as far as the cheapest state to already live in, and that's where you're at, then you can explore offshoring. Offshoring is just as it sounds. That's when you would send a job out to India, you'd send it out to China, you send it out offshore, off of your country's shore. Now, the reason that companies do this is because they can make a very livable wage in some of these places, and it's a third of the salary. It's a quarter of the salary of paying an American employee. For this, think of those manufacturing jobs. On the one end, we all will say, I want all these jobs back in America. But when you go to the store and you have the opportunity to buy a flat panel TV, and you have the option of buying a 50-inch for $200, or you have the option of buying a 50-inch for $2,000, well, you won't be surprised to know that the $2,000 TV is probably one that's made in America, or at least another higher cost of living country. Now, on the same token, don't be surprised that the $200, $300 TV is probably one that's made in Taiwan or China or somewhere in India because they have a much lower cost of living. So they have a much lower cost. When you look at your retirement, you can also take advantage of the same offshoring strategy. If you've already taken significant steps to lower your expenses, you felt like you've already kind of downsized and taken care of that too, then offshoring may be the option for you. Now, you do want to look at how safe these countries are. Every country's not safe. It used to be a lot more common for someone to retire in Mexico because you were pretty close to your country. So you still had flights in and out where you can visit family, birthdays, and trips. You can go to your reunions and all that fun stuff. But then you're also relatively close. And there's a lot of people who can speak English in Mexico. So you don't have that language barrier of concern. But what happened more recently is people are being kidnapped and being held for ransom and the drug cartels and different things. So Mexico has been less and less of an exciting retirement option for people. I know others that have gone to Costa Rica. I know some that have gone back to Africa, Nigeria to be specific. I know many that have gone to Italy. There are lots of places where people have considered moving, and the cost of living is so much lower than living in the United States. So they're able to just live off their Social Security and they're living like a sultan. They're having a great time and they're enjoying themselves. These are all strategies for you to be able to lower your overall expenses to where you don't have to work any additional years, but you're still able to maintain a high quality of life in retirement. Number three on our list is making a retirement budget. It just makes sense when you look at the first two things that we talked about. We talked about the money coming in through your investments, your pension, and Social Security. We talked about money going out with your expenses and lifestyle in retirement. So naturally, we have to have somewhere to keep track of all of this. Are we maximizing our investments lever? Are we maximizing our cost reduction lever? Let's take a look and see how we're doing. We then go to our budget, and that's where we keep track of this information. We can see our net worth, we can see our expenses, our income, and how likely it is that we're going to retire successfully. It makes sense for us to track this information so that we know how close we are to our goal. And your budget isn't just going to have your overall expenses and income, it's going to have all of your goals for retirement. All of the trips you want to take, all the places you want to go, all the events that you want to do, the people that you want to meet, everything that you have as a desire in retirement, we're going to put it in the budget. And the reason we're going to do that is we have to be able to fund it. We don't want to just write down our goals because then that's just a dream or a wish. We want to put a number next to it. And then we want to calculate that number and then we want to achieve that number. When you have the budget, that's where all that information goes. If you want to join a golf membership, if you want to join a traveling group, it doesn't matter what you want to do, there's a cost associated with it. Now, if there's not a financial cost, we do know that there is a time commitment. And so, whether or not we have to put it in our budget so that we know this is going to take 3 years, this is going to take 1 year, this is going to take 10 years, just so that we can keep track of how we want to spend our time in retirement, that is the beauty of having your retirement budget. Now, I know most of the time people will say, oh, budgets, don't do budgets, they're annoying, nobody wants to. And I can appreciate that. I don't like budgets a whole lot either, but I do know the value of a budget. And so I'm not someone who's going to tell you what you want to hear so that I can get a sell. I'm someone who's going to tell you what you need to hear so that you'll be excited to see me in 30 years when you're retired. You're like, everything is great, Dre. This is fantastic. I don't want you being like, Dre, you lied to me. You told me everything was okay. You took my money. And now I'm at the creek without a paddle where I'm 10 years into my retirement and I don't know if I can go 10 more years. The fourth thing that we can do to make the most out of our final years of retirement is putting a healthcare plan together. As I mentioned in another video, and I'll put a link to it, a great place to start your healthcare plan is with the triple tax benefit or your health savings account. An HSA, if you have access to it through a high deductible plan, that is a great place to start. Up to $4,500 a year, that money goes in tax deductible, it grows tax free, and it's distributed tax free if you use it on a qualified healthcare expense. That is your triple tax benefit. It is a phenomenal option for those that can take advantage of it, and that's normally going to be the first place to start. In addition to that, this is now money that you can actually use to pay your healthcare expenses in retirement, which they will come up. Now, they may not come up in the first 5 years, they may not come up in the first 15 years, but it's going to come up at some point in retirement. And you will have that money that's sitting there that's been growing tax free that you can spend on these qualified healthcare expenses, which I think is phenomenal and a great place to start putting your money in those last 5 years before you retire. The next thing you want to do is start looking at Medicare. And I've done a few videos on Medicare, and I'll put a link to a couple of them. But the main thing that you want to keep in mind is if you don't enroll in Medicare in that 7 month period where you have 3 months before your 65th birthday, you have 3 months after your 65th birthday, and you have the month of your 65th birthday, that you will then be paying this penalty. And this penalty isn't just a one time thing, it changes what your actual monthly payment would be. And that is for the rest of your Medicare journey. So for most people, it makes sense to go ahead and enroll in Medicare, even if you have no intention of using it. Now, there are a couple of exceptions where, for most people, if you work at a place that has 20 or more employees and you have a full time qualified benefit plan, and you're accessing it, then you don't have to roll in Medicare right away. And I'll put a link to my Medicare series where I go into greater detail where we talk about these different plans and what is covered. But your Medicare plan doesn't cover everything. So you have Medicare Part A and B, which normally covers your hospital stay and your medical expenses. And then you have Medicare Part C or Medicare Advantage, which has an additional charge. It's actually offered by private insurance companies. It's just that they adhere to whatever the Medicare standards are, and you can access that if you want to. And the Medicare Part D, which is the prescription drug plan, and that's just your prescription drugs as well. But that one has a monthly payment and it has penalties attached to it if you don't enroll in the right time. So you just want to have all of that set aside. When you're getting ready for retirement, you've already explored the Medicare supplement plan. You already know which one you're going to use and which ones make the most sense for you. You already know your Medicare Part A, B enrollment, the phone number that you're going to call. You have an entire healthcare plan set aside so that you already have a reminder in your phone. It's going to tell you, let's get into action. We already know what we're going to do, what our monthly payments is going to be, and whether that makes sense for your overall retirement goal. A lot of the times we don't really think about a healthcare because it's just something that we automatically pay while we're working. And then when we stop working, we start eventually realizing, okay, if I'm not working, then how do I get healthcare? Now, some people will say, okay, well, I know that Obamacare, I know we can go to the Affordable Care Act and go through the exchanges and get health care, but is that the best option for you? Because that's the only option we can think of. For some of you, sure, it might be the best option for you, but for others of you, it's probably not going to be the best option for you. But you need to give yourself enough time so that you can comfortably make that decision without feeling the stress and pressure of saying, okay, I'm going to be leaving work soon and I don't have any health care. I want to make sure that I have something in place when I stop working. We can go ahead and put a strategy in place. For others of you, you may be retiring even before you turn 65. So we have to already have a plan in place to be able to afford the health care for you while you're waiting to qualify for Medicare. There are lots of pieces that go into this plan, but if you spend the proper amount of time getting things ready, you'll feel really good. And so the last 5 years is a great place to take advantage of that. And the fifth and final thing that you can do to get the most out of the last 5 years of your working career is to consider this thing called a phase retirement option. And all a phase retirement option is basically you're not going to go immediately into cold turkey, like I start working, I start retirement. You actually can phase out. Now, if you ask me, well, Dre, is that something that is actually offered by my company? I would say, well, the majority of companies don't offer a structured phase retirement option. Now, you want to ask them if they do, but even if they don't, you can build your own where you can say, hey, I'm thinking of retiring in the next 5 years. I would like to maybe in year three start cutting my hours back. This way, you can bring someone in, and I have 2 years to get that person up to speed where I lower my hours. So it gives you a little bit of wiggle room, but I'm also making myself available to train the next person. And so that helps the company a lot because there's this African proverb that says, when the elder dies, it's as if a library burned to the ground. And when you talk about the wisdom of someone retiring and leaving the company, all the relationships and processes and understanding that you've built over your career, you know who to call and when to call and where to turn off the switch and all these different things. When you leave, that hole is going to take some time to be filled. But if you're someone who's planning on retiring and you enjoy the work that you do, it's never been an issue about the work, you just really want to have more control of your time, well, a phase retirement option gives you that ability where you work much fewer hours in the same capacity, and now you're being used as a mentor for the next person. That tends to be a win-win option for most forward-thinking businesses. It doesn't mean that your company will accept the offer, but at least it means that you have this strategy in place to where you may feel, if I could just work part-time for the last couple years, I know that I'll be able to check off all of the final boxes so I can transition very smoothly into retirement. For others of you, you just want to dip your toe into retirement. You're not really sure what you can do with your time, but at least you can try different things out. You have a little bit more free time where you can kind of figure things out, but you're still having the money coming in, so you don't have to start going into your investments just yet. You still have access to your healthcare while you're working because you're in a phase retirement option. So it just ends up working very well for people as a nice transition where it's almost like you get to try retirement while slowly leaving work, where it's not a cut and dry, cold turkey retirement party, kick you out the door, all your accesses are taken away. It's like, how about I come in 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and then we can get the next person up to speed while I'm mentoring, answering questions. And then while we're doing the transition, you actually still have access to me because you're going to realize, as the owner of the company, you're going to realize, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that Dre was doing all of this stuff for us. He never said anything. And so once you're gone, people will be like, oh, okay, we realize we have to assign this to somebody and that to somebody and this over here. And it just makes it a little bit nice for everybody. But again, this strategy is for someone who enjoys the work that they're doing. They enjoy the people that they're working. The salary is nice. And the big issue that they have is it takes up so much of their time. So by having a phase retirement option, you now get control of some of your time. You still have the healthcare and the money that's coming in. So you don't have to access your withdrawals or spend your money on these other things. But then when you pitch it to the company, you obviously don't pitch it from your benefit. When you pitch it to them, you talk to them about the transition being smooth for them. That when I leave and you turn off my accesses, maybe you would like someone to be able to introduce them to whoever the stakeholder is, whoever the internal or external clients that you interface with. Whatever your position was, it makes the transition much easier for the next person if that person comes with you. They can see how you interact with them, they can see what the expectations are, how you do your processes in your daily work, and then everybody wins. And I find that it is a great strategy for the right situation. If you're someone who's 5 years from retirement and you want to be more happy and less worried about it, go to obsidianwisdom.com/wealthy to learn more. I'm always thankful for our time together. I appreciate you. I really do. You could have been anywhere. You chose to be here with me, and I'm thankful for it. If you have any questions for me, go ahead and put them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as I can. If you found value in this video, I ask you to like and subscribe so you continue receiving valuable insights on how to build your own wealthy retirement system. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.